2, 1. Okay, this is the third lecture in 232. We're up to slide 65, I think, in chapter 14 on the brain, and hopefully we can get through that today. All right. We were starting to work our way through the parts of the brain one more time, and once again, I just want you to know that I don't want you killing yourself about all the minor parts of the brain. I just want you to know the main ones, because I really think that's all at this stage of your education. The diencephalon, we've talked about it before. It contains the thalamus, the epithalamus, the hypothalamus. Also includes the pineal gland. The pineal gland is the one that makes melatonin. Please remember that melatonin is not the same as melanin. A melanin is what? It's a pigment that's dark, okay? And you remember we studied it in the skin, but it also, there were melanocytes in the loose connective tissue. Remember that connective tissue proper, the crinkly stuff? But this is melatonin. You can buy a big bottle of melatonin for about $5 at Costco. It's a natural sleep aid, and it's the only one I've ever used that I found really cheap and helps you get to sleep, and I like it. I use it 3 times a month probably, and when I have trouble sleeping, I use it, and it works well. And it comes from your pineal gland. Just too far away. Yep. We've been through that. All right, help me out. Huh?
You passed it again.
I did?
Yeah.
65.
Right there.
I sure did. Boy. Okay, let's talk about the thalamus for just a minute. There's lots of things you can learn about the thalamus, and the thalamus has all kinds of different parts and so forth to it. But I just want you to know that the thalamus is kind of a filtering area for information that's going up to your brain. And it decides what is going to get through and go all the way up to your cerebral cortex for you to think about. And you know, I talked the other day about the sound of the fan and the weight of your shirt on your shoulder and stuff like that. And a lot of that stuff just doesn't get through. When you're at the thalamus, you're also right at the third ventricle to help you with the anatomy on your midline slices. And I'll just leave it at that. The thalamus is not really, it's not visible from the outside, even though it's got this circle on it. That's deep down inside the brain. So you see it on a midline slice, but you don't see it from the outside. And this is what I mean by there's all kinds of ways you can split up the thalamus, and I do not expect you to learn all these parts, so don't even try. Just know that the thalamus serves as a focal point for all of these sensory inputs to come in to the brain, and then it kind of sorts out what is going to make it all the way through. You do see that it sends some to the cerebellum as well to help with your coordination and so forth. But look at that. There's visual, general sensory, auditory. It's just kind of all there, but that's good enough. The mammillary bodies, that's the problem that I've had in my life because I can't control my reflex eating. And so mammillary bodies are important. They also process your smell and taste and other things. That's all you need to know about the mammillary bodies. The infundibulum is the stalk that the pituitary gland hangs from. It connects the hypothalamus above to the pituitary gland below. Now, we're going to go through, when we get to the endocrine chapter, we're going to understand that in pretty much detail. But please just know that's all you need to know at this point. And also, let me tell you that on all of the sheep brains that I've ever seen come through this class, I've never seen one that had the pituitary gland left on it. I don't know if that was mine. They just get hacked off as they're loosely cutting those brains out of the skulls of 100 sheep an hour or whatever they're doing at the slaughterhouse. But that's why you never see it here. There are models in the lab, and you might want to just look at that. The tuberal area is right in there close. Please don't worry much about it either. Here's another one of those close-ups that splits things up into a million parts. This is what I want you to know. I want you to know that this is the infundibulum, which is the stalk that hangs the pituitary gland on the bottom of the hypothalamus, which is this big area up here. And above that is the thalamus up here above that. And that's it. You don't need to know all these green and blue and pink and purple areas like you see there. We will be able to see this thing here in the pituitary gland and the infundibulum. You'll be able to see that under the microscope when we get to it, but we're not going to really be into that quite yet. The pituitary gland, as you will learn, has an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe, and the anterior lobe secretes a whole bunch of hormones. The posterior lobe secretes 2. Oxytocin and ADH. Thank you. So anyway, please rest easy and know you don't have to know every part of the thalamus or hypothalamus or any of that stuff. I don't think it's appropriate for this course, to be honest with you. So here's a nice little sagittal section.
Do you have a Brian Patrick here?
I do.
No, you can't.
You're telling me no, I can't speak with you?
I'm in
I'm
class.
He's in class.
I'm in class right now.
Man, we appreciate you.
But somebody.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You gonna arrest us? Don't shoot me, bro.
What's your name?
My name's Sessions, like Sessions of Congress. And I'm in the middle of the lecture. Thank you.
Ridiculous.
This is the parking ticket?
Yep. I thought you guys had
Namaste.
Thank you.
Calm down.
Sorry for the interruption.
What?
Sorry for the interruption.
Well,
I
that's
can't
no
believe
problem.
that.
I can't believe they did that. I've been here 8 years. I've never seen one of those guys come in here.
Absolutely insane.
Especially for something the death in the family or something. All right, here we go. This is the parts of the brain that you really ought to know, and you can see all of these on your sheep slices, sheep brain slices. The optic chiasm, you should be able to identify. The optic chiasm is part of the optic nerve, but it's really pretty obvious if you look at your brain a few times. This is the mid, though, where parts of it cross over and parts of it don't. The mammillary body is back here a little bit behind. Here's the tuberal area, which means this is where the infundibulum, right in here is where the infundibulum is attached. Pineal gland back here. Thalamus is in this area here. Hypothalamus is below that. Anterior commissure is here. Septum, corpus callosum, septum pellucidum. Those are the parts that I think you should be able to identify. But let me just tell you that on some of the sheep brains, those are going to be really hard to identify, and they won't be on the test if they're hard to identify. They will be obvious. Okay. 8 functions of the hypothalamus provides subconscious control of our skeletal muscles, controls our autonomic functions, heart beat, and heart rate. Now, those are also controlled in the medulla oblongata. Biggest thing I always think about with the hypothalamus is it's the thing that controls the activities of the nervous and the endocrine system. In other words, the two systems that really control our body, one is the endocrine system, which is kind of the slower control and works through hormones and the endocrine glands, and then the nervous system, which is the rapid response thing that goes on. But they are really kind of coordinated here in the hypothalamus. So it's the place where the brain interacts with the endocrine system. The hormones in the posterior that are made in the hypothalamus, which are then secreted in the posterior pituitary gland, are the two we just mentioned a minute ago, ADH and oxytocin. Now, it's really important that you realize that even though these hormones are made in the hypothalamus, they then travel down into the posterior pituitary gland, and that's where they're actually released into the system. What are the 8 functions? Now, I don't know how every bit of this is all that important, but I think these things kind of make sense. The hypothalamus controls your hunger and your thirst, coordinates a lot of your autonomic functions, which are your automatic functions. It regulates your body temperature. This is the part of your brain that has the thermostat in it, so as the blood flows through your hypothalamus, it sort of checks the temperature and helps you coordinate things like shivering and closing down your blood vessels close to your skin and so forth. It controls the circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm is your day-night cycle. For those of you who have to work evening shifts or have to work night shifts, you know how hard it is to go from working nights to working days and turning your whole biology around. That's what the word circadian rhythm means. And so that's included, also works on here in the hypothalamus. The limbic system is a functional group. It's not really an anatomical group of the brain. It helps us, helps with our emotions, and it also helps with linking some of our conscious functions with our autonomic functions. For example, you see something that's really, really gross, and somebody's dying, and you faint. Okay, now that's that's connecting between your emotional state and your autonomic functions, your blood pressure, and so forth. So the limbic system also plays an important role in memory. So I'll just let you take it at that. That's really all I think you need to know about the limbic system. Okay, let's talk about the biggest part of the brain now, the cerebrum. Obviously, it's the largest part. It's the one that does all our thinking and controls our intellectual functions. It processes our sensations and motor information, and it's the one that thinks. It's the one that makes us higher than the other animals. The gray matter is on the outside. Remember, the spinal cord is just the opposite to that. Remember, the spinal cord, the white matter was on the outside, but in the cerebral cortex and in the cerebellar cortex, the gray matter is on the outside. Here's the parts of the cerebrum that you ought to know. Basically, you can call these the bony parts if you want, because they're all named after the bone that lives right above them. So you've got the frontal lobe up here that's right behind the frontal bone, and you've got the parietal lobe that's right out here underneath the parietal lobe. You've got the occipital lobe back here that's in front of your occipital bone. Your temporal lobe is in front of your temporal bone out here, and I think that's it. There's two other markings here that I think sometimes you almost have to make them up. I'm trying to be honest with you here, but this sulcus here, called the lateral sulcus, usually you get the feeling there's kind of a V down here, and that's where the sulcus extends from. And so the sulcus extends back up this way, but sometimes it's so curly-cued that it doesn't, you always kind of wonder, is that really it? And that's really true of the central sulcus, which you see they have on this drawing here, looking nice and neat, like it goes right down here and right down there, right down there, right down there, and hits up with the lateral sulcus. Well, just know that when you look at your brain, your sheep brain, and when you look at the models of the brain, sometimes it's still not so clear. But you just need to know that there is a central sulcus, and because there's a central sulcus, that means there is a precentral gyrus. It's the one right in front of it, and there is a postcentral gyrus, which is the one right behind it. Okay. Now, why are those important? Well, those are the motor and the sensory strips of your brain. Okay. Now, you have to bear with me. How do you keep them straight? Well, here's the way I always learned it, and this is how I always remembered it. The precentral gyrus in front is where all the motor control is of your body. So all your motor control is in the precentral gyrus. In the back is all of the sensation in the postcentral gyrus. So this is the main sensory strip of your brain right there in the postcentral gyrus. And how do you keep them straight? Well, the way I always did it, when I was a teenager, I used to go on dates, and when you wanted to drive the car and you needed to use your motor functions and you wanted to step on the pedals and turn the wheel and so forth, you did that in the front seat. When you wanted to kind of work out your sensory stuff, you got in the back seat. Now, you tell me 10 years from now if you remember that, okay? You'll remember that.
Or you can just use the alphabet. M becomes before.
Oh, hell, you could use alphabet on everything, but that's something you will remember that one. Okay, so the precentral gyrus, remember, is the primary motor strip. The postcentral gyrus is the primary sensory strip. We're going to come back to them. So here's that picture. This has got a bunch of colors to it to help you reward yourself by learning what happens in these different areas. Precentral, postcentral, parietal lobe, frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is, people used to do prefrontal lobotomies for people that were goofy or mostly had schizophrenia. They would operate on them and take out their frontal lobe. How many of you saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? In Planet of the Apes? Yeah. Cool. Well, McMurtry was his name, the guy that got locked up with Nurse Ratched and so forth. Anyway, they took his frontal lobe out and he just kind of became a zombie. And you remember the big Indian chief put him out of his misery and suffocated and killed him. It's a great story. Jack Nicholson played McMurtry. All right, here we go. Occipital lobe is back here in the back, and so forth. Pons, medulla, occipital. I think we've been through all those things a couple times. Remember, central sulcus. See, here's an example of how kind of vague it is. See, it looks like it comes down here, but it doesn't even make it all the way down because there's another, it gets cut off down there. So it's not very exact. Just be aware of that. When you cut it open, look at it from the inside, it's all pretty much the same, except now there's one more lobe that you can see from this view that you couldn't see previously, and that's the cingulate gyrus, which is here on the inside. Okay? You cannot see the cingulate gyrus from the outside. Moving along. Three principal functions, three principles of the cerebrum. Okay, the basic one is that the cerebral hemisphere gets information from the other side of the body. Okay, so the left cerebrum controls the right side of your body. Not only the motor of the right side of your body, but the sensory of the right side of your body. And indeed, folks that have a rather significant stroke on one side, usually in their middle cerebral artery up here, will be paralyzed and will be numb on half their body. The two hemispheres have a little bit slightly different functions. And that's where this whole business of, oh, he's right brain or he's left brain, that's where that comes in. However, just know that that's very imprecise. And we don't really understand exactly why it seems like some people's right brain is more active and the left brain is, or their left brain is more active. In general, it does relate to your handedness.
Where does that cross over? I mean, right brain, left brain, sensory, motor.
Where does everything? Oh,
Is it just, yeah.
wait till we get to pathways. We're going to get to that in the next couple days. Most of it flops over at the spinal cord level. In the white matter, is, what is white matter, remember? White matter is mostly myelinated fibers. It's not the cells, it's just those long axons that are going from one part of the brain to the other. And I do not make a big deal out of this, but just so you know, there's association fibers that associate one part of the brain to the other. There are commissural fibers. What does commissure mean? Crossing over, so that your right hand knows what your left hand does, that sort of thing. And projection fibers from different parts of the brain farther down, they project up to others. I would just not make a deal of that. I don't expect you to know any more than that. The two biggest areas of commissural fibers are the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is a huge piece of white matter that connects the cerebrum on one side to the cerebrum on the other. You've seen it on your midline slices. And the other one is the anterior commissure, which is easy to see and easy to identify, but that's what it does. It also sends fibers from side to side of your brain. Basal nuclei. Now, when you see that name, basal nuclei, you probably think, oh, that must be a bunch of nucleuses, like, DNA is in the nucleus, right, and all that stuff. But, well, what a basal nucleus is in the brain is it's a mass of gray matter that is buried down in the brain. Okay, now most of the gray matter, remember, is up on the surface, up in here, but there are basal nuclei, which are collections of gray matter down in the brain itself. Okay? So here you go. Also called cerebral nuclei. They're masses of gray matter. They're embedded down in the white matter, and they sort of direct a lot of our subconscious activities. And I'll just leave that at that. This is an example of the basal nuclei. Please do not learn these. Another thing I think is just a little too far to worry about. You should know that you should be able to see easy on your midline cuts, your sagittal cuts, that you have this anterior commissure. Here's the one of the big areas where fibers go from side to side, and here's the corpus callosum up here, which carries lots of fibers from side to side. We just talked about those a minute ago. Here's these different basal nuclei, the amygdaloid and the lentiform nucleus and putamen. And every time I see that word putamen, I think of Putin. I don't know why. Anyway, don't worry about them. So let's talk about the motor and sensory areas of the cortex, because they're really the most important parts. Because they're separated by that central sulcus. Remember, the back of the front seat. That's the central sulcus. Motor areas, precentral gyrus, controls voluntary movements. It doesn't control most of your involuntary movements. And the primary motor cortex is right there on the surface of the precentral gyrus. and there's a lot of pyramidal cells. When you look under there's some slides over there over the cerebrum. You ought to look at them and identify those pyramidal cells. The pyramidal cells are very significant because they oftentimes connect to a whole lot of other cells. One brain cell can attach to as many as 50,000 or 100,000 other brain cells with their little dendrites. And that's how we are able to relate all these things and create these patterns of sparks, so to speak, in the brain. Sensory is right behind that, and it handles all of these different sensory areas, touch and pressure, pain, and so forth. And remember that it's on the surface of the post-central gyrus. You ought to be able to know, you should know where the visual cortex is. I'll tell you, it's in the occipital region. Auditory cortex, olfactory cortex, and gustatory cortex. There's nice pictures in the book here that show these. And you ought to have some idea, I think, where these are located. So here's auditory. This is what we hear with. Our olfactory is way up front. The front part of our brain is really the oldest part of our brain. Before we could think and before we could see, we could smell. There are some bacteria that we think even at that stage can smell. Think about how much more sensitive a dog smell is than ours. I just find that amazing. Police give a dog a shirt or something from somebody, and the dog goes out and finds that person. I mean, that's pretty amazing with just your nose. I never thought about that, had you? You really hadn't. I know. It's just like there's so much to think about here. It's just so cool. Anyway, so here's the visual area back in the back here. Gustatory is your taste, and I'll just leave it at that. These association areas, I think, are just, all of our senses are related, and our brain is all related to each other. For example, this is a real simple example, but if I stand here with my hands out to the side, and I try to hold really still, you'll probably see that I'm still moving a little bit. But if I open my eyes, I can stay pretty still. Now, why is that? It's because I have that much more input into the system that's controlling how I stand, because now I'm adding vision in addition to gravity and my proprioceptive, which way my elbows point and all that stuff, all that other information gets put together. And that's really all I wanted to say there. The general interpretive area is also referred to as Wernicke's area. There we go back with an eponym again. It's only on one side or the other, and I think I'll just leave it at that. It's an area that coordinates visual and auditory memories. Well, the speech centers are very interesting. I remember I had a patient one time that came in. His wife brought him in. And she said, and I'd known him for quite a while as a patient. She brought him in and he said, Dr. Sessions, something's just not right with George. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you just try talking to him. And I said, okay. George, what's your name? Yeah. George, what day is it? Oh yeah, today's It took him about 7 years to recover from his stroke to his speech center and to where he could put his words together. He knew what he wanted to say, he could hear what he was saying, but he couldn't put them together to form words. And that's just an example of the speech center being wiped out. Otherwise, the guy was fine. I mean, his arms moved fine, he could walk and everything else, but he just couldn't speak. Now, if you wanted answers from him, what did you do? You give him a paper and pencil and let him write the answers. He could write just fine. He could see fine, he could write fine, but he could not coordinate his speech. So this whole brain is a pretty interesting thing, I think, from a lot of ways. Here's the GIP, the general interpretive area. Eye field is right up here. It's a sensory area, obviously. Speech center is right along in here. We called it Broca's area, another eponym that helped control that. You don't need to know all of those. We could follow a lot of this stuff a long ways in this class with the book we have, but we're just not going to do it. This is the thing I was saying about the right and left. Here, and let's just make these comments. And these are just kind of loose comments, okay? So this is not very factual. But in most people, the left brain is the dominant hemisphere. Now, that's because most people are right-handed, okay? So if your dominant hemisphere is over here, you're probably going to be right-handed on the other side. Makes sense? And so, if so, they usually do reading, writing, and math, decision-making, speech, and language are mostly on the left side. Does that mean they don't have any on the other side? No, but it means most of their control comes from the dominant side. On the other hand, for you right-brained people, I won't make any sexist comments there, although my wife is much more right-brained than I am, for sure. And so she's very into touchy-feely stuff and touch and smell and sight and taste and faces and vocal inflections, you know. She, oh, you quit yelling at me. I'm not yelling at you, dear. You know, it's like vocal inflections can be so important, right? So anyway, here's kind of a lot of hemispheric lateralization, a little diagram. Please don't go memorizing this. Once again, this is the right-handed person who's holding the pencil you see in their right hand. So they're usually going to have most of their dominant centers over here on this side. So writing, speech, general interpretive area, visual cortex is mostly on this side. And I'll just leave it at that. What's a seizure? A seizure is a symptom, first of all. A seizure is a symptom. And it is a symptom that is kind of like having a fever. Okay, when you run a fever, that's a symptom, right? Your temperature goes up a little bit. A seizure is kind of like that. And a lot of people that have brain disorders of lots and lots of kinds, including kids who just run a fever, will oftentimes have a seizure. And certainly when children have a seizure and it's accompanying a fever, it's generally not very serious. But in this modern day of CAT scans and MRIs and stuff, you can bet they're going to go through one and make sure everything is okay. But I think the way to think about a seizure is if you have an itch in your brain that happens to be right over here, and it's in the motor part, so it's in the front right here, and suddenly that area starts to fire off, and electrical impulses just start firing, and they get in a circle, and they start going over and over and over again, and it happens to be the part that starts in your, goes to your finger on this side, then you're probably going to start like this, and next thing you know, that seizure is going to spread your whole arm, it's going to spread your whole side of your body, and the next thing you know, you're going to be laying on the ground, unconscious, and having a seizure. Usually it then clears up in a few matter of minutes, and you usually have, you feel lousy. Most people have what's called a post-ictal state, post-seizure period of time from 4 to 6 to 8 hours where they just feel like hell because they've exerted all this energy having that seizure. Please, if you ever see anybody seizing, don't go trying to stick something in their mouth and keep from swallowing their tongue and all that stuff. A lot of orthodontic bills were created by that. People lost teeth and all that stuff, and it's really not necessary. Okay.
What if they're choking?
Huh?
Isn't it supposed to?
Well, you probably want to roll them over on their side so they don't vomit and aspirate it. But no, they're not going to choke.
You're not choking on their tongue?
No, they're not. That's the old wives' tale.
Okay.
Yeah. What? Why do they foam with their mouth? I don't know. I'm sorry? Can they still talk during a seizure? No. Usually they're pretty much out of it. They're pretty much unconscious. Yes.
Then if someone's having a seizure, what's like the best thing you could do for them?
Lay them down on the ground so they don't fall, or ease them to the ground and kind of turn them over onto the side into the not fetal position, but on their side, so if they vomit, it'll come out instead of going back down their trachea.
Secure their head.
Yeah, but that's something between the head and the ground, so they're not.
Time it.
Time it.
Very good. This was a 3-minute and 20-second seizure. Yeah. Good. A grand mal seizure just means that it eventually spread to involve the whole body. Okay. Tiny seizures can be as little as, and then it comes right back. There's some seizures where people go to sleep, and then they come right back. And it doesn't spread to their whole body. Yeah.
I've heard of seizures where you can just like space out, but the severity of it is equivalent to the length of the seizure, correct? They look at the length of the seizure and determine kind of how bad it is.
I think that's true. Yeah, what you're describing is what's called a petit mal seizure. In other words, it's just a little bad.
It's just a
That's
little
what-
bad.
That's what petit mal means.
You just have a little seizure here, fine.
Yes.
When do you call 911?
When they had a seizure, you call it.
I think most of
I have a friend who has a seizure every week, and they don't call 911 every time.
Well, that's because he's called 911 a bunch of times, and they found out that they're not going to do anything.
Right.
But the first time somebody has a seizure, you definitely should call 911.
But say my friend is having one that's worse than usual. What's the sign that I need to call?
worse than
Because
usual.
it's not like he can tell me.
Yeah, I think if he starts turning blue, he's not looking good. I'd call 911 in a minute.
Yeah,
If
that's
he's not
Yeah.
breathing, feel his pulse, those sort of things.
Because a lot of people
But I don't have an exact answer for you.
Okay.
More than 5 minutes is.
There you go.
More than
Nurse
5 minutes,
Ratchet.
call 911.
More than 5 minutes. I know. She's right. Anybody else know more about seizures than me? What else you want to? No, your son has them, and he takes a bunch of medicines, and that's the hard thing, Kids who have seizures, it's always a problem because, not to beleaguer their parents at all, but usually the problem with kids when they're having seizures and they're on medicines is they forgot to take their pills that day, or they forgot to take the one at noon, or whatever. So that always plays a role. Controlling seizures in kids is a big deal. Obviously, it's really hard on them when they have one, just because everybody looks at them and says, "Ooh, what's wrong with him?" And that's about all. I have to drop my granddaughter off a block away from school so they don't see her getting out of my crappy old Prius, Like, it's so embarrassing, Grandpa, when you drop me off at school. So, kids live in a different world. Yes?
Can't they treat some sorts of seizures or like ones that aren't you can't treat with medication? They remove the corpus callosum so that there's no misfiring between the hemispheres.
There's a nice little thing in your book that talks about cutting the corpus creates what's called dissociation syndrome, where one side of your body doesn't recognize the other, and yeah, that is done. There's also new studies that are being done where you're putting a whole bunch of EEG leads, EEG electroencephalogram, which is where you monitor brain waves, and they put brain waves all over the head, and they're able to very precisely identify right where the seizure is coming from. And sometimes they've even gone in and taken out a little piece of brain right there, and then cured the seizure problem. Some people have had a lobectomy of different things based on where their seizures are starting, if they are totally uncontrollable. But man, that's a very, very rare case.
So there's another thing, there's an implant that goes to the vagus nerve.
Mm-hmm.
Catch it. So we're looking into that, but it's something you can swipe if
Mm-hmm.
it starts.
Yep, they have a magnet that they implant so it can send an electrical pulse once they have a start having a seizure.
Is
Right.
It like a pacemaker for the brain
Pretty much, yeah.
or for that nerve?
Yeah, it stimulates the nerve, so it
And I would also tell you that if I ever pass out in front of this class, please do not call 911. I have a fainting issue that I've had for about 15 or 20 years, and usually once a year, sometimes twice a year, I will faint. And I have one of those little things implanted under my skin right there too. Feel it? Yeah. No. Just don't, just watch me. I'll be back in about 5 seconds. Mine don't ever last very long. But I hate it. I mean, here's what I really hate is when I faint, and it takes me 15 seconds to wake up, and the class is all up here. Oh, it's gonna be okay. And the next person that appears is one of those people that has one of those silver stars that says, "Hi there, I'm here from public safety, and I'm here to fix you." And I say, "No, thank you. Please, I'm not going to the hospital. I'm not taking me in an ambulance. I'm fine. I've been doing this for a long, long time." So,
This is
be
not
warned,
something
all
like
of you.
a-
Yes, sir. Back there.
The only thing that you haven't touched on yet about seizures, at least from a pre-hospital perspective, is for those of us who run in ambulances,
Right.
you would push a category procedure that lasted longer than X number of minutes. If the pulse ox dropped below 5,
Yeah.
we would call it status epilepticus, and that would
Status. Yeah.
recategorize our approach of pushing Hillgall or Azepam or
Right.
chemically we will stop this data.
Yeah. I don't mean to. Yeah. I'm just trying to say if you're at some place and you don't have all those fancy supplies and you don't have all the drugs and you don't have an IV, pretty much just back off, leave them alone. Most 99% of the time you'll probably be okay. The ones you guys are probably getting called on also are usually people that have had them before, and they probably don't call you until it's been going 5 or 10 minutes, and then they are having troubles. Thank you. That's a good point. Okay. I ran through my little on old Olympus's towering tops the other day with you, because I thought you ought to at least hear the words first. And now we'll go through them again with pictures here. Remember, there's basically 4 different classifications of cranial nerves. I didn't talk about that the other day, but most of them are sensory. Remember, my brother said Marilyn Monroe, and some say Brigitte Bardot, and something like that. Anyway, sensory nerves, motor nerves, and mixed nerves is 3 of them. And the last one here is the special senses. The special senses are cranial nerves. Remember, cranial nerve just means it's a nerve that comes directly out of the brain that picks up on these special senses. Smell from your nose to your brain is cranial nerve 1, the olfactory. Sight is what carries the sight messages back from your eyeball, your retina of your eye, back to your brain. That's cranial nerve 2, or the optic nerve. Hearing used to be called the acoustic, now it's called the vertebral. No. What? Vestibulocochlear. Vestibulocochlear. Carries both hearing and balance. That's the 8th nerve. Anyway, let's run through them, and I think these are really cool because we can actually have a series of little videos of people that are missing one nerve is not working on one side, their tongue sticks out funny, or their face is paralyzed on one side. Things like that, I think, are very. This is really anatomy in action, seeing how it works. So anyway, on Old Olympus's towering top, Finn and German viewed some hops. Olfactory is number 1, optic is number 2, oculomotor is number 3. Trochlea goes only to one muscle, the superior oblique. Trigeminal is the biggest nerve and goes mostly to the face. Abducens abducts your eye, only goes to one muscle of your eye. Facial goes to the muscles of facial expression of your face, leads to Bell's palsy. Show you an example of that. Glossopharyngeal, or acoustic rather, is now called the vestibulocochlear. Vestibulo means the semicircular canals and our sense of balance, including the vestibule, and the cochlear is the like conch shell thing that is what we hear with. Glossopharyngeal, glosso means tongue, pharynx means pharynx. The glossopharyngeal provides sensation to the back of your throat. So that's your basic gag reflex and control of your swallowing and things like that. The vagus nerve, number 10, is the vagabond nerve. It wanders down, goes through to your heart, your lungs, all your intestines, and so forth. Spinal accessory that's why it's called S instead of A, but it's the nerve. And it's just muscular, and it just goes to these trapezius muscles back there. And then the last one, number 12, is the hypoglossal, which controls the muscles of your tongue itself. And then this little saying down here helps you remember which ones are sensory, which ones are motor, and which ones are both. So they're classified by their primary function, that they may have important secondary functions. I think you just kind of need to know them, to be quite honest with you, and I don't think it's really that tough if you organize your thinking and you write up a chart and you put down the things you need to know about them. They all come out of the brain, as I said, and this is the part that I don't want you to freak about, because you're not going to have to identify them from the brain. And you're certainly not even going to have to identify them from the human brain that we have over there, even though it's a lot bigger. Because the cranial nerves are really still pretty tiny. The only 3 that I could possibly ask you to identify are number 1, which is this one here, and it's pretty obvious. It's the olfactory nerve. It's the one that goes from the top part of your nose, goes straight up through the cribriform plate. Remember the cribriform plate? And then it runs, it goes in here to the olfactory bulb, which is kind of a little knob on the end of it. It's very obvious, and it runs back here and goes right into the brain. The sense of smell, by the way, is the only sense that does not go through the thalamus and get kind of weeded out. It goes straight into the brain. One olfactory smell is the only one that does that. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, where's number 2? Oh, the optic nerve. Yeah, the optic nerve is a big boy. And the optic nerve is weird because it kind of comes up, this side comes from one eye, this side comes from the other eye. But then when they get here to what's called the optic chiasm, they trade a lot of fibers from one side to the other side to go on back to the brain, back to the visual cortex, which is back in the back part of the brain, the occipital lobe of the cerebrum. So 1 and 2 are usually pretty easy to see. 3 occasionally you can see, but I'm not gonna tell you you're gonna have to know that one. I'm only gonna tell you that if I was gonna ask a third one, it would be the trigeminal, because usually it's the biggest of the cranial nerves. The trigeminal goes to your face. So they do come off in order. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's the trochlear, number 4. Here's the trigeminal, number 5, which is bigger, as I said. Here's the abducens, which is really tiny. here, facial, vestibulocochlear number 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. But please don't worry about those. I want you to know what they do. I don't want you to be able to identify them on a specimen. Let's go through them one by one again. Number 1 is the olfactory. Olfaction is the sense of smell. It's primary. It only has one function. This is an easy one. All it does is carry smell to your brain. Where does it start? It starts in the olfactory epithelium. The olfactory epithelium is the name given to the part of your nasal mucosa up here above your superior conchi. You remember the 3, superior, middle, lower conchi, those things that kind of stick in from the sides and warm your air and moisturize it as you breathe. So the olfactory area is above the upper conchi. So it's in the very, very top of your brain. It just goes out through those little holes in the cribriform plate and then goes right into the olfactory bulbs and then goes into the brain. So that's it. It's a real simple one. And it's a real obvious one to look at. Remember the Christogali? Oh, I love that name. Christogali. Yeah. And anyway, you notice that it does not go to the thalamus or anything. It's just your sense of smell goes to your brain, goes directly to your brain. It does not stop it go. It just goes straight there. And if you think about that evolutionarily wise, that's why some of the animals have such incredible senses of smell, is because it's not filtered out. Here's a kind of a cute picture of that. Here's the 3 conchi that I just mentioned. The olfactory area is all up above the upper one. And remember the little holes, the cribriform plate. The Christogali is the thing that comes up in the middle and kind of sticks up a little bit, divides right and left a little bit. There they are. And then it hooks into this olfactory bulb, and the olfactory tract carries it right back into the olfactory cortex. And like I said, it's a direct shot. What's that bone right there called? Maxilla? Very good. Very good. You guys got to watch me now, because when I see pictures like this, I realize that A&P is not something you just study for one test and then forget about, right? Right? So what's that bone right there called? Frontal. What's that hole right there called?
Frontal sinus.
Frontal sinus, yes. Very good. And what's this little thing right here called? That's the pituitary, yeah, but what's the bony thing that it's in?
Sella turcica.
Sella turcica, right.
Turkish
Turkish saddle. There you go. All right. Number two is the optic nerve. It only does one thing, and that is it carries your vision, okay? It's a special sensory nerve, obviously. The only thing it carries is a special sense called vision. Where does it start? It starts in the retina of your eye, the back of your eye, and it carries it out through the optic canals where it goes out of the orbit, and it goes to the optic chiasm, this thing, the crossing thing right there, right near the pituitary gland, and then heads on back into the diencephalon, goes to the thalamus, eventually goes back to the optic areas. The optic chiasm is a really interesting thing, and I love talking about it because I want you guys to understand this. And it's really pretty simple if you just sit down and think about it some night in the privacy of your own home. Think about it like this. This diagram's in the book, but pay attention to mine. It's better. optic nerve comes out of the back of the eye right here, and it collects all these fibers from the retina. Okay. Now think about this as you're looking up that way with your eyes, and realize that this half of the retina over here sees, when it passes through the lens, it sees what's happening over there. Does that make sense? Lenses kind of reverse things. And this side of this retina here is looking at things that are over there. Right? So both of this side of my retinas is actually seeing what's out here, okay, on one side. Whereas this side over here, if I had another colored pen, that'd really be good, but it sees things over here just the same as this thing here sees things over here. Now, wouldn't it be nice if you're trying to put these pictures together so that we can look with both of our eyes and see things out in front of us? Wouldn't it be nice if this stuff right here and this stuff right here went to the same side of the brain? Wouldn't that be great? So here's the way it works. The nerves from that part of the eye come out here, and they go through across through the optic. They go straight back to the brain on that side. The things from right here, these guys from that part of the retina come here, and they cross over and go to the other side of the brain. This side here also crosses over. This is the optic chiasm right here, and goes to this side, and this part of your visual field comes back here, and it also goes out there. Now look at this. This part right here is the lateral side here, so it's looking that way. And this line right here goes here, it's looking out that way. And switcho changeo, now one side of our brain is getting two pictures that are about the same, that are going to the same side of the brain. Did that make any sense to you? So the way it works is the messages from the medial half of the retina. Remember, the medial half of the retina sees the lateral half of the visual field, the part you're looking at. This stuff here crosses over. The two middle parts cross over. The two outside parts do not cross over. And that's why if we got our optic area destroyed, our occipital area of our brain back here destroyed on one side, we would lose the vision to everything out over there in both of our eyes. But we would still be able to see everything out there, because this side would be okay. So you lose half of your vision, but you lose half of it out of each eye, so that you got two views of the same thing, which is kind of cool. Now, I just threw a lot of stuff at you there, which I know just kind of went right over your head. But watch this here. I think this will help. So looking at the red fibers here, you see they come from the medial side of the retina here. You see they cross over. The green ones here, they come from the medial side of that retina, also cross over and go over here. So that all of the messages that are coming back here to this part of the brain, you see they're making a stop here in the thalamus. Again, like most everything else stops in the thalamus. They synapse here, and then they're sent back here. So the optic projection and the part of the visual field that this half sees over here is these guys, this green line, which is that way, and this red line, which is right here, which is that way. Right, and so when we start talking about doing visual testing, we're going to find that some people, when they lose their sight, they can see just fine. out here, but they can't see anything here with either of their eyes. Okay? And you can see how that can happen from this. Now, in reality, what do patients really do? They just turn their head a little bit. They may be blind in half their visual field and not hardly know it because they've learned to just turn their head and then they can see fine. Next nerve is number 3, oculomotor. Its primary function is motor eye movements, and it goes to a number of muscles and of the eye. And the muscles of the eye that it goes to are the superior, inferior, and medial rectus. And just so you know, these seem like big words, but they're really not that hard. Think of this as your eyeball. And if you had a muscle that was on top called the superior rectus, and this muscle contracted, your eye would look up. If it was on the bottom, if it was the inferior rectus, it would look down. If it was on the lateral side, it would look out. If this was my right eye, for example, it would look out. And if it was on the medial side, my eye would look this way. Okay, so the 4 rectus muscles are really easy to understand what they do. There's 2 others that are a little bit more complicated. They're called the superior oblique and the inferior oblique. And what they do is they twist the eye. Superior oblique, inferior oblique. There's one more muscle of the eye muscles that you need to know about, and that's called the levator palpebrae superioris muscle. Monchill, what does the levator palpebrae superioris muscle do? Dan? Eyelid, yeah. Your eyelids are referred to as your palpebrae, superior one and inferior one. The only one that really amounts to much is the superior one, and it has a special muscle that lifts the eyelid so you can open your eyes and see. Usually it just falls down and that's the end of it. Okay, now, I don't know how to say this in any other way, but you know what? In another chapter, we're going to be doing the special senses, and you're going to need to learn all of these muscles of the eye.
We had to learn them already.
Huh?
I said we had to learn them already.
You already had to learn them?
Yeah, the 6 muscles of the eye.
Right, when you were learning muscles.
Yeah.
That Sessions, he's just incredible, isn't he? He makes you learn shit way up front so that it's really easy later on, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, I forgot I did that. Yeah. But anyway, some of these folks haven't learned their eye muscles yet, so you'll get to do that. And then we'll go over them again when we get to the eye here next chapter. There's a couple more eye muscles that are called the intrinsic eye muscles. What do you think it means when it says intrinsic? Lisa? What's an intrinsic muscle? Huh? They're inside the eye, that's right. All right, now think about what muscles would live inside your eye that you need. Yeah.
Muscles to dilate and
Muscles to dilate and open your pupil, right? Because your pupil gets bigger when it's dark, smaller when it's bright. What else? What? No, not really. How about this?
Focusing the lens.
Focusing the lens, that's right. Remember, if you have a 35 millimeter camera and you focus it, you move the lens back and forth. But that's not the way we focus our eye. We don't move our lens front and back. We change the shape of it. So we're going to learn about making it fatter and making it thinner. We have a series of muscles that go around our lens that make it get fatter or thinner. And that's why I can focus on that periodic table down there, and then I can focus on my thumb, and I can go back and forth incredibly fast, and yet it never looks blurry to me. The muscles of our eye, the intrinsic muscles of our eye are so fast. It's amazing. Okay, oculomotor. I think I've beat this enough, but basically, the oculomotor also sends the ones to the intrinsic muscles of both the iris, to open and close the pupil, and the lens to change the shape of the lens. The trochlear nerve is number 4. It only does one thing. It only goes to one muscle, and that one muscle is the superior oblique muscle. And the reason it's called the trochlear nerve is because the superior oblique muscle leaves your eyeball and goes up and runs through a little pulley. Another name for a pulley is a trochlea. So it runs through a little pulley and then comes back to your eye. So it seems like it works backwards than the way it ought to. But if you think about the little pulley, it changes the direction of the pull. Superior oblique muscle, and it basically rotates the eyeballs. Abducens, it only goes to one muscle also. It goes to the abductor, the muscle that makes the eye go out. And remember, for my example here, that would be the lateral rectus muscle. The lateral rectus muscle, when it contracts, it makes you abduct your eye. Abduct means move away from the middle, right? Adduct is move towards the middle. Okay. Lateral rectus muscle. Here's the way this is really a great picture. But I think one of the things that I always try to get you guys to do when you look at a diagram in your book, think about it for just a second. And the most important thing when you're looking at that picture right there is to realize that this is the left eye we're looking at. And we're looking at it from the lateral side out here. Put that in your brain and then go look at these pictures here, and then it sort of makes sense. And what you'll see, this is the lateral rectus, okay? This is the inferior rectus. This is the superior rectus. And that one over there is the medial rectus. That's the 4 that move the eye around. And then there's 2 oblique muscles. Here's the superior oblique, which remember I said goes through the trochlea. See the trochlea there, that little pulley? So when this muscle pulls, it causes the eyeball to rotate that way. Okay, it rotates outward. And the inferior rectus is right here, and you notice it's just kind of running around the eye, and it rotates the eye the other way. So we have 6 muscles that control the movements of our eye. Superior, inferior, medial, lateral, superior oblique, and inferior oblique. The last muscle, the last extrinsic muscle, is this one here, the levator palpebrae superioris. Levator, it lifts, palpebrae, the lid, the superior lid. Okay? And here it comes, right back here. And so several of y'all the other day had a bunch of gunk on your sheep brain. It was kind of coming. It was actually coming from the back of the eyeball. And what you actually had was a bunch of muscles and a bunch of fat that lives in there. That when they pulled it out of the sheep skull, they brought that with it. Wow. It all fits together in the circle of life. I love this stuff. We'll go through 6 and then we'll quit. Number 5 is the trigeminal nerve. It's the biggest nerve of all. It mainly supplies sensation to the face. That's the main thing the trigeminal allows you to feel things. There's actually 3 branches to it. One is up here around your eye. The second one is on your face here, your maxillary, and the third one is your mandibular. Let me go see if there's not a better picture. Here it is right here. So here's the trigeminal, and you see the lower part, we call it the mandibular branch. The middle branch, we call it the maxillary branch from the maxilla, from this area. And the upper one we call the ophthalmic branch because it goes up and supplies sensation to your eye and on your forehead. So, if you were to rub your eye or get a stone in your eye or something, that sensation would go back through the trigeminal nerve. Now, the thing to remember here is that's different than the facial nerve. The facial nerve carries inputs out that goes to the muscles of the face. All of these guys, the smiling muscles and all those orbicularis oris and orbicularis oculi, that's the one that closes the eye. Remember those from early on? Okay. It also, the trigeminal does have a little bit of motor branch. Don't forget about this. While it's mostly just the sensation to the face, it also goes, the mandibular branch, lower part, goes to the muscles of mastication. The ones that make you chew. Your masseter, your pterygoids. And we'll quit right there. We've already done 6. 6 was the abducens, the one that rotates the eye out. So we're halfway through. We just like probably not 5 or 10 more minutes of this. All right, let's go to lab. Yeah. We have a quiz on Thursday. Did you read your news releases?
It says exams. Yeah, it is. Your email was super funny when you emailed me back.
All right, just
Like that.